Inspiration for writers can come from just about anywhere, or anyone. Such is the case for today's guest, author, poet, and editor Matthew Salinas, who attributes his early introduction to horror to his grandmother. Also, an idea from his wife for a microfiction story leads him to search out a publication, and ultimately, his story is accepted by a microfiction online magazine, Fairfield Scribes, for which he is now the special features editor. It's time to grab your favorite brew, get comfortable, and listen to Matthew talk about his journey thus far. This is the Brewing Fiction Podcast. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Keith Leonard, and I am joined today by Matthew Salinas, published author and poet. Welcome, Matthew.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So I'm going to start with a question here. You and I were introduced through Allison McBain, and she was a guest just a few weeks ago, and wondering how you and Allison been acquainted.
Yeah, so it's actually it's a long and funny story. So back in the day, my wife, she's a school teacher, and after school she does tutoring. And so one day, I was emailing back and forth with her because she's not allowed to have her phone out, and I don't want to distract her too much. And she asked me, could you tell me a story? So I asked her, sure, what about? And she told me, how about a story about how Post-it notes one day revolt against people and, throw a revolution. So I thought, okay, sure, that's right up my alley. And so, I wrote her a story. It was real short, came out to about 100 words or so. And, she really liked it. She thought it was really good. And she thought, hey, you should probably find somebody that could do something with this story. So I looked around, and sure enough, I stumbled upon Fairfield Scribes. They do microfiction. They're an online magazine. Allison's one of the main editors for it, and nowadays I'm one of the special features editor for it as well. And submitted it to them, and they liked it enough to actually publish it. So that kind of started my foray into microfiction, and then I just kept writing for them. They graciously offered to have me be the special features author in, I think it was 2022. So every month for a year, they published one of my works. And then after that, I gave them a whole bunch of microfiction stories because I decided to do a big collection. And I told them, you can use any of these. And then Allison and then Mr. Ahern, who is the head editor and founder of it, both very, very graciously asked me if I wanted to come on board as the special features editor. And of course, I was having a great time with it. So I said, absolutely. And, the rest is history. So you say.
Yeah. Wow. Great story. You're right. Yeah. You know what? I met Allison through Medium. I don't know if you're familiar with Medium. It's a haven for all of us writers. They delve into any and every genre that you want. There's a lot of help writing on there. There's quite a bit of fiction, not a lot of suspense horror, which I'm into, but a lot of suspense, a lot of fantasy. There's just a whole gamut. You'll have to check it out sometime. Most of the work is behind a paywall.
Gotcha.
Right. So, but up until talking with Allison, I had not heard of Fairfield Scribes. So I was introduced to Medium just about a year ago, and that's how I come to know. Read some of Allison's work on there and met her through Medium. So what I'd like to do is I'll step back a little bit here. I'll ask you to step into Author's Corner, which is basically you get a chance to tell me a little bit about yourself on a personal level, anything you want to share. And then we'll get into some of your more of the interview side of things where I get to learn you as an author.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. So take it away. Mic is yours, sir.
Yeah, so as I've been introduced by the great host here, Keith, I am from Illinois. I'm an author. I've been writing pretty much since 5th grade. It was the first time I ever really got into creative writing, and I've always just had a very active imagination as a child. I do primarily write in microfiction as well as horror. The horror aspect is just growing up. I was a big fan of the Goosebumps series. Growing up as a
Oh,
'90s
yeah.
kid, I
Yeah.
was in the heyday of the Goosebumps series, the TV show Are You Afraid of the Dark? There was also a large influence of that from my grandmother. She was a huge Twilight Zone fan. And so I
Okay.
used to,
Okay.
yeah, I used to watch a lot of that show with her. Like I still do it now. Every New Year's, the tradition with her was that we would watch the Twilight Zone marathon, and I still do that to this day.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah, and then also to the very very scary stories to tell in the dark series that was in like every public school library. That has the cover art that's just absolutely terrifying, as well as the illustrations that just give you nightmares.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's just I've always really resonated with the horror genre, and I just love something about the supernatural elements and aspects of it, and a little bit of kind of like the social commentary, but you can also be humorous, but you can also be serious. So I
Yeah.
feel like just the horror genre in general is a great medium to kind of talk about a whole bunch of different things while, sticking to one common similar theme or motif or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
I did start as a self-published author. Did that for a little while. During the COVID shutdown, I had so much time to just sit and write so many things.
Yeah.
And I just kept churning stuff out. And eventually I thought, I want to go the route of finding somebody that's going to help me get my work out there. So I jumped on the great world of social media. I went on, Twitter, Facebook, all that stuff, and just tracked down every small indie publishing press house I could find and just sent a bunch of different manuscripts and works out to a bunch of different people. It went exactly as everybody said. You get so many rejections before you finally, and then you finally start to get people who are like, oh yeah, hey, I'll sit down with you. We can discuss it. So I sat down with, a few different companies, and I ultimately decided on Coalescence Publishing. They're based out of Tennessee. They're the outfit I run with now.
Okay.
And they were just very, very author-centric. They're one of the very true publishing houses in the way that I feel that everything they do is held to a very good standard, as well as it's not like a vanity press to where, it's like, give us X amount of dollars and then we'll publish something. I don't have to pay them anything. They work on the cover art with me. They work on the editing. We go back and forth with like formatting and all this other stuff. And it's just, they work until I'm satisfied with it as a product, which is another thing I've had to learn to be good about, because I am my own worst critic. I can sit there and be like, I don't think it's good enough yet. And my wife's like,
you're a typical author. I think we all seem to, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you're always second guessing yourself, right? I have been writing with them for a couple years now. I've got a few books out. I just actually did C2E2, the Comic-Con Entertainment Expo in Chicago. That was last weekend.
Yeah.
And I had an absolute blast. It was my first time doing it. I was there pretty much for the majority of the weekend by myself, just sitting behind my booth, yelling.
So
books.
you were actually, you were there with your books versus being a spectator.
No, yeah. I went with my books.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
I was as shocked as anybody else when they told me yes. When I submitted so many applications to so many different conventions, and they got back to me and they were like, sure, tell us more about yourself. And I was like, no way.
Yeah, someone's playing a joke.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, that can't be. Are you sure you got the right guy?
Wow, good for you.
Oh, thank you. My first time ever doing it, and it was a blast. I stood there behind my little setup booth table, just yelling scary books at anybody that walked by. Some people turned and laughed. Some people were like, not a fan. But it shocked me how many people would double back and be like, what's this about scary books? Or you had me at scary books. And I was like, okay, all right, these are the kinds of people that are, going to be my readers. And another great surprise was I actually ended up selling out of all the books I brought. Which I thought maybe I'll sell a few copies going into this. I was like, there's no, but by the end of it, I had just people coming back and back, and some people would buy one book and then they'd come back and buy the rest. And I'm like, this is awesome.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I had a great experience.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Holy cow. So how long exactly have you been writing? Other than, I know you said you started as really young, but I mean, let's say professionally writing. How long have you been?
Professionally, I've been writing for about 3 years now.
You've realized quite a bit of success in 3 years, yeah?
Yeah, I've just been absolutely floored with how well stuff has been going and how receptive people have been towards it.
Yeah.
Especially my most recent book that got out there, As It Stands. It's a collection of 13 short horror stories.
Okay, and that's your most recent, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the most recent, I guess, standalone book by itself. I did also do a C2E2 exclusive called A Nail in the Coffin, which is actually a collection of microfiction, both, horror and not, but yeah. It's got sweet cover art. It's this skull and it's all bloody, and they did it all up real nice for me and real fantastic.
Okay. Yeah, I went to your publisher's site there and looking at some of yours. I actually downloaded A Shallow Shadow, read some of that.
Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to find out your genre and what you're about. And when I heard that it was microfiction, I was like, that's my forte right now. I mean, I do a lot of drabble, so writing in 100 words, similar to what you've said. So I was like, okay, I got to see how your collection was put together and those kinds of things, because somewhere down the road, hopefully sooner rather than later, I may just leap into giving that a try myself. So, I had a read of your stories. Actually, I had my playbooks read it to me while I was driving. Are you a full-time writer now, or are you still not quite there? Do you do something else beside writing as a career?
I'm still not fully quite there. I do still have a full-time day job, working my regular 40-hour work week. And then also too, we just had our first child. We had a son back in December. And so writing has kind of been slow to a crawl.
Ooh, I was just going to say, you know what? You probably have to relearn how to budget your time now.
Oh yeah, no, and it's so sporadic. Like I'm very grateful that when it comes to writing, I'm one of those people to where I don't have too much of a setup routine to where, I've got to get my coffee. I got to light this candle. I got to take my shoes off. I got to sit in this corner. I'm one of those people who I'm like, all right, I got 10 minutes, bust open my laptop, typing furiously as best as I can to get it done. And then, all right, baby's crying.
Well, you've answered about 6 of the 15 to 20 questions I wanted to ask you on your interview there. Obviously, the questions that we're going to go through are just general questions that I think everybody wonders what authors do. So I've been doing this about a year. And the reason I started the podcast is I want to learn from people like yourself who's already had some success or haven't had success. And so we can talk about the reasons why, so I can avoid that pitfall too, So, yeah. So if you don't mind, I'm going to have a little bit of fun. I call it Fast Five. All it is just to know where your head is at, when I ask you, your favorites of this word pair. So,
yeah,
here we go. So, do you like vinyl or digital music?
I'd have to say digital. I have no experience with vinyl. I did used to be a huge fan of CDs, but
yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I think that
the last time I went to Best Buy and I asked them where their CD players were, they just looked at me and they were like, "Get out." It's like, oh,
so
all right.
Can you imagine a guy at my age going and looking for cassette? So I guess that question is definitely dictated by the age.
Yeah.
All right. Are you now? I kind of know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway because you're going to have to say neither. Daytime or nighttime writer? You're just whatever.
Now, currently, I definitely say more of a nighttime writer.
Okay. Say before your child, were you nighttime?
Yeah, for the most part. Just because usually during the daytime, I try to get done as much as I can, so then I have some allotted free time towards the evening to write and not have those things in the back of my mind like, oh man, like I still got to do the dishes, or I got to take the garbage out, or I got to do this, or I got to do that.
Gotcha. Cool. If you had a choice, would you prefer to write in a cabin in the woods or in a city cafe?
Oh, that's tough.
Right?
I think I might go more of like a cabin in the woods just because I feel like I can be easily distracted.
Nice.
Also,
Okay.
it's definitely a thing with authors to where sometimes when you're writing, you find other things to like preoccupy yourself with, even though you know you should be writing.
Fair. Okay. uh, Coffee or tea? What's your
Oh,
preference?
coffee. Coffee
Coffee.
100%.
Too much coffee?
I mean, in rare situations, yes, but otherwise than that, it's kind of what keeps me going.
Nice. Okay. All right. And kind of answered this one as well. I was going to ask if you were self-published or traditional, but you've done both.
Yeah. I've now kind of transitioned more into exclusively doing traditionally published stuff.
Nice. Nice. All right. So, with that, we'll jump into the interview side of things. And can you just tell me a little bit more about your latest work? So, maybe not the latest published book, but something you're currently working on that listeners can expect in the coming weeks or months.
Yeah. Oh no. So I really do like doing short story collections. So after I got done with As It Stands, there are a couple of, multi-part stories, and some of them I would so first off, As It Stands has been doing really well, which again, I'm floored by it and incredibly grateful and happy about. But I
Yeah.
was shocked with how many people who have reached out to me and been like, "Well, I need a part 3 to this." Or, "Well, what happens next?" And I'm like,
Right.
"Oh, okay." So I started another collection of, this is probably going to be the most ambitious thing I'm going to do. It's going to be like 18 or 20 short stories. It's going to be a massive book because I'm shooting for like at least 5,000 words for each story.
Okay.
And I'm doing a lot of carryover part 3 stories from, As It Stands. Like I've got one that's based off of, it's this, I guess, ongoing story called Tyler's Ghost, which all started with this little boy in a graveyard who has to complete this dare, and he has to bring this ghost back from the cemetery back to his house for undisclosed reasons. I don't want to spoil the story.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, which actually got started in the first place by this little kid just giving me this drawing of a ghost. And I asked them what it was, and they told me to hang it up in my apartment because it's a good ghost and it eats the other bad ghosts. And I was just like, that's a story right there.
Right. It is so.
Yeah, and so that story I've kind of morphed into like, it happened, the event, to him when he was a child. The second part of the story touched on Tyler as an adolescent and like the post-traumatic stress disorder of going through like everything he went through. Because I feel like it's very common in horror to discuss like these crazy things that happen to kids, but then it kind of just tails off and ends there. So my thought is, what if I did his adolescent years, and now in part 3, it's going to be his adult years, and it's just going to be like the progression of how something that messed up would truly affect somebody as they continue to mature and grow.
Wow. Nice.
Yeah, so that's something I'm really excited about. And then on the much less serious side, I'm writing this other story that I don't have too much of other than a working title for, called Farmer Vampire Werewolf Mummy, which is literally exactly what it sounds like. There is this inconspicuous farmer who ends up all in one night. He goes out to his barn. Oh no, there's vampires. He gets bit by a vampire. Stumbling away from that, and he's like, oh gosh, I'm an undead now. His livestock's getting attacked. He goes to go fend him off. It's a werewolf. He has to fight the werewolf. Werewolf bites him. He's like, oh man, I'm a vampire and a werewolf now. Goes to run into the woods, accidentally runs in front of this truck that's, delivering antiques to a museum, and it turns over. What's in the back of the truck? It's a sarcophagus. Oh man, it's a mummy.
Oh, there you go. You've almost got 100 words already.
Because, if at anything, I can never be too serious for too long.
Nice.
But yeah, so I've got that. I've got a couple other stories that I'm kind of just making up and going along with. And then all along the way, I'm trying to connect everything into one cohesive universe. to where some of
Yeah.
the characters from some of the short stories are going to start to meet, and some of their
Yeah.
stories are going to get intertwined. I am
Okay.
also working with kind of similar to like a Stephen King Randall Flagg type character. I do have
Okay.
like I guess for lack of a better term, a big bad, like in the background of these stories. And he's
Yeah.
kind of mentioned in a few of my works, and I'm kind of bringing him more out into the front with this next series collection.
Nice.
And yeah, I'm just chugging away on writing more good horror.
Wow. Well, when I read A Shallow Shadow, it's microfiction stories from all over, just different ideas, which is kind of where I think my first one would be. A lot of my drabbles and my microfiction, they're unrelated. So is your collection somehow tied together so that you could say this is a themed book, or is it just random stories?
I'd say it's kind of a little bit of both. Some of the
Okay.
stories are definitely more of like the theme of coming of age combined with sometimes more of like a man versus nature or man versus the supernatural type deal. And then other stories are just like, oh, like the titular story for As It Stands. Like the story itself, as it stands, is just a complete homage to H.P. Lovecraft.
Okay.
Like I
Gotcha.
sometimes I take something and I'm like, I want to write in a very similar story slash setting to whatever author I really, really like, or something I want to emulate, but do my own personal twist on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there are some that I think thematically kind of share a little bit of the same thing, but there's definitely some that are just kind of completely out there on their own.
Okay. Fair. With Fairfield Scribes, would you guys like your magazine similarly just kind of a collection of different works, or does it run a theme every time you post or you publish a
Um,
magazine?
it's pretty much a collection of different works because
Okay.
outside of the editors who occasionally contribute stuff, it is open to the public. So we're always
Right.
open to submissions. So it's pretty much, we just break it up into, there's like a fiction, creative nonfiction, and then poetry section. So
Okay.
pretty much anything that falls under those umbrella terms is fair game.
Nice. And open to the public. So any of the listeners who are looking and trying to decide where to go, it's a good start. I mean, it was a really good start for you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then also a little shameless plug right here. So in the in the next upcoming months, we're reopening the Fairfield Scribes Prize contest, and
Okay.
essentially that is an open contest. I think we're doing from May through either August or September. I can't remember what the deadline we set on is yet, but
Yeah.
that's open to the public. You can do, I believe it's up to 3 submissions, so up to 300 word ish stories for anybody. And
Cool.
then we will be doing 3 winners. The top 3 winners, there is a cash prize associated with it, as well as your work will be published in Fairfield Scribes in the special issue that we do for the Scribes Prize. And
Nice.
then also there are, I believe, 15 to 20 honorable mentions, which as well we work the best that we can with those authors to also get their work published. It's entirely up to them if they want to be published in the magazine or not. But then,
Right. Right.
yeah, and it was a really, really good time last year. Um, Being one of the judges too, I have found that it also really helps me understand my own writing and kind of overcoming my own personal biases and things, because it's always interesting to see how other people write things and to be able to sit there and look at things and be like, oh, I like this. Well, why do I like this? Or I don't like this. Am I giving it
Yeah.
a fair advantage or a fair play? And then, yeah, it's just also too, we do offer like critiques slash writing tips on every single story that gets submitted. So
Right.
I'm going to be very busy.
How do you find the time to write? You got a new baby. You're an editor with Fairfield Scribes, and
Yeah.
with this project coming up, how are you going to have time to write your stories?
I mean, that's the thing is a lot of people try to hold themselves to specific, in X amount of days or whatever
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
timeline is. I need to write X amount of words. And I used to try to be that way too. honestly, the best thing that I have for the most part is the deadlines that my publisher gives me. Because then it's
Right.
like, all right, I need to get this work done in X amount of time, or I'm gonna get in trouble.
Nice.
But so really, it is just finding your moments. I mean, sometimes I'm at work, and if it's a slow day, I know I'm not supposed to, but I'll be writing something on my laptop, or
Yeah.
if I'm on lunch and I get a really good idea, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna write that down. And sometimes it's the wee hours of the night. All right, my wife's asleep, baby's asleep. You crack open my laptop and get a little bit of writing done.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then also too on the weekends, luckily there's a little bit of time to get into
For sure.
writing as well. But
Yeah.
I have always found that as long as you're willing to find a way to make time, there's always time to be had.
That's good advice. You've said that you don't need a routine. It doesn't take you long to get in the zone. So you can jump in, like you said, 10 minutes, write a story or work on a story or jot down an idea and run and change a diaper, right? No problem.
Exactly.
Good for you. Yeah, I have a bit more of a routine, but I'm really trying hard to not hold myself to time and worrying about writing enough each week. I started the podcast a month and a half ago, and it takes a lot of time. Now that I've got Heather on board, she's helping with some of the connections and some of the booking and that kind of stuff. But there's the time of chatting, then there's the editing, and then there's all the other things that go with it. So it's taken a lot of time, and sometimes I sit down and say, "Oh, I wish I had spent a little bit more time writing."
No, I get you.
Yeah, and I mean, everybody so far, yourself, Allison, Heather, we've all had the same conversation. Stop doing that to yourself. So That's a piece of advice that seems to follow along with every episode. Join us next week as we continue talking with Matthew. Navigating the publishing world can be intimidating for aspiring writers. Matthew shares his journey and gives tips on where and what to look for when starting out. Also, you will get to hear an excerpt from Matthew's chilling anthology, As It Stands. That and so much more in part 2 of our chat with Matthew Salinas on the Brewing Fiction Podcast. Stop by the podcast homepage for links to today's guest and to see what else is brewing on the Brewing Fiction Podcast. You can find the links in the description. And don't forget to click the subscribe button to be notified whenever a new episode is released.